living in? Am I dreaming? Who is gonna protect us now? Right back to color. Blacks depreciate. If we're not careful, we'll be back segregated. Change for the better of your soul. We gotta change our love.
Hello there, everyone. I am Jay Loff. I am the one of the co-founders and president of Charter. And on behalf of our partners here at LifeLabs Learning and Brand Live, I want to thank all of you for carving an hour out of your very busy days to spend with us, whether that's in the early morning or noontime or in the late afternoon. We're grateful to have you here. As you can see from the data that was just flashing across the screen, and I'm pretty sure that you didn't need a chart or a graph to reinforce this for you, change is indeed challenging. Workers and leaders at all levels are struggling more than ever to try to cope with the changes that are small and large inside their organizations. This can be exhausting, it can be anxiety-inducing, even paralyzing. And yet it's the one constant in all of our personal and professional lives. So it's really no surprise that in one of the charts that you saw, I think 50% of HR leaders noted that change management is a top priority for them this year. Our hope is that this first installment of our brand new Charter Skills Accelerator series will help all of you acquire a mindset, a framework, a shared language, and a set of skills for helping your teams navigate change in ways that are less daunting and hopefully actually even exhilarating. Before I introduce the facilitator for the day, though, let me just briefly explain the genesis of this new series and the idea. It's really born out of our commitment and our mission to try to be beyond just a trusted partner for shaping your beliefs and priorities. Hopefully, many of you subscribe to the Charter newsletter and see research and interesting ideas from the world of the future of work. But we also want to be a practical partner for you, help you bridge that research into practice by giving you practical tools and tips and exercises like the one today to actually begin to implement the change that you're trying to make every day in the world of work that you are all navigating. So that's what this series is about. This is the first of 5 of them. The next one will come up on September 7th. We'll do another in October, one in November, one in December. And we will get updates to you on how to register, what the themes of each of these different workshops will be through the Charter newsletter, which hopefully you subscribe to. If you don't, you can go to charterworks.com and readily do that. There's an events tab on that site that will also be updated with the new workshops and information as we go. And we'll certainly push it out to you through social. And I know our partners at Brand Live and LifeLabs Learning will also be pushing out information as we develop the next phases of these. These are all free of charge, and that is really due to the generosity of LifeLabs Learning and to the support of Brand Live, both of whom, like us, believe that they're just new and better ways for us all to tackle the workplace challenges of today. Before we get started, let's just briefly hear actually from the president and CEO of Brand Live, our good friend, Sam Colbert-Heil.
We're thrilled to sponsor this series from LifeLabs Learning and Charter, and hope it's a shining example of what's possible. Because let's face it, it's 2022, and everyone is bored out of their minds with talking heads in little boxes. At Brand Live, we're injecting a little bit of soul into this thing we're calling hybrid work. Whether it's a webinar series like this one, your biggest marquee event of the year, a new hire onboarding series, or your next town hall. We're reinventing how companies and leaders communicate with video so that shows look and feel like the television and TikToks we're watching outside of work, with tools and formulas and creative support to help you tell stories and create something worth watching, whether it's live or on demand. Because the key to making sure your audience doesn't tune out is to make it so good they'll tune in. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sam. So we're especially excited to be partnering with LifeLabs Learning on this series. This is a team of educators, scientists, consultants, experienced designers that we ourselves have long admired, and a lot of us at Charter have worked with in past lives. They're focused on equipping leaders and employees with the skills that make the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time. And that's something that we've been eager, as I was saying earlier, to bring to our audience of more than 63,000 Charter subscribers. So we are grateful to LifeLabs Learning for powering this program and the future ones in the fall that I mentioned. And I know you're going to be glad that you spent this time with them. So a couple of quick housekeeping things. Do say hi to each other in the chat if you haven't already. You can ask questions of the facilitator in the chat. I think he will actually be prompting those, so look out for that. And at the end of the program, we will pop up a link for you to fill out a quick survey that tells us how this did for you, whether it worked, what we can be doing better, and just hope that you'll spend some time doing that for us, because it'll help us shape the program in the future and make sure that it's really on point for you. So let's get started. Without any further ado, I want to turn over the program and the rest of the hour to one of the leading facilitators from LifeLabs Learning, Jack Nicholas.
Jay, thank you so much, and hello everyone, wherever you are in the world calling in from. It is a real joy to be here with you. Thank you, Charter. Thank you, Brand Live. We're here. You're here because this idea of change management called to you. Wherever you are inside your organization, as a people leader or working in an HR function or a POPs function or just someone who's nerdy about the world of work, you're here because you're trying to figure out, how can I help my teammates? How can I help the people I work with navigate all of these changes that we're experiencing in a better way? And that's really at LifeLabs Learning what we're all about. As Jay said, our work is about studying the workplace. It's about studying organizational psychology to try to understand, what are those tipping point skills? Those things that we look to see, like those really small changes that ultimately, when they get to the habit level, we see managers, we see teams, we see leaders really using again and again and again to make the biggest difference possible. When we're talking about change, we're really talking about a suite of different kinds of tools. We're talking about strategic thinking tools. We're talking about communication tools. And I think ultimately, maybe most importantly, we're talking about relationship tools and emotional intelligence and the ability to bring people along on what could be a turbulent change journey. So, what I'm going to share in the next 40 minutes or so are some of the highlights from one of our change management workshops that we lead with managers and leaders. And I'll actually be trying to make this as interactive as possible. It's one of the beautiful things that we get with Brand Live. And so, if we could share the deck, bring that up right now. Awesome, we're here. I actually want to start by having people experience share. I know that we've got plenty of people on this call, in this chat, who have seen change initiatives go wrong. And maybe we can start there. And Ben, if you wouldn't mind pulling some examples from the chat, maybe it takes you 10 seconds to think, look back, laugh to yourself about, oh, that happened. What do you see as some of the problems? What are the skills that leaders are lacking when it comes to creating really effective changes? Where are the obstacles, the choke points, the bottlenecks, the frustrations that you see? The reason to ask this question as you're putting these things into chat is, today is not just about me sharing frameworks or ideas. One of the things that I know from doing this work across many different sizes of company is that this is also a place for you to talk to each other. I'm seeing things coming in here, real lack of communication, really strong one, absolutely. I heard, yes, not managing emotions. Maria, I see that being pulled in. Absolutely. Thank you. We know that this is going to be an opportunity for you to talk with each other as well. So, as Jay mentioned, please keep the conversation going in chat. Brian, no desire for change. What is happening in the psychology of I want to preserve the status quo? Yeah. Change happens and fizzles out, James. There's no sustainability there. We'll talk expressly about that today. Yeah, there are a lot of things that get in people's ways. Um, if you're the type of person who is interested in making this experience as interactive as possible for your brain, um, Natalie, I see that once the change is lost, the work is done. Again, yeah, what's the tail of that? How do we think long term about change? If you're the type of person that likes to work along, feel free in this moment to put down on your piece of paper, just have it in a notepad, some change that you'd like to see happen. And we'll be referring back to these examples as we go through. And if you're the type of person that's like, no, I'm just here to watch, it is fine. For anyone who maybe doesn't know who LifeLabs Learning is, where I'm coming from, I hope you do. But the briefest introduction is, as I said, we get the opportunity to work with a lot of interesting companies at a lot of different stages of their growth journey. And we actually go ask the question, who are the best managers that you have? Who are the people who are keeping teams engaged? Who are the people who are everyone wants to work for? Who are those people who you can just see are leading their teams through change journeys effectively? And we actually study them. In the before times, we'd bring them together into these little retreat lab environments. We've watched one-on-ones over Zoom. We've interviewed them, and we cross-reference our practical research with research into organizational psychology to understand what makes those leaders who are able to navigate all the challenges that people are talking about in chat effectively. And where that takes us is three big buckets of skills. The first is understanding the psychology of change. We often talk about this in the people development, employee engagement business as, emotional intelligence, EQ, or SEL, social emotional learning, or sometimes people talk about it just having empathy, to the point was made in chat of managing the emotions. We see clearly that there is a skill set that managers and leaders can have of understanding what's going on for the other person or the team here. So we'll talk about skills there. We'll talk about tools to bring people along, generating momentum, understanding when there is resistance, what might we be able to do to soften that? And then, maybe most importantly, is how do we stay in this stance of consistent flexibility and changeability? So let's get into this conversation about understanding the psychology of change. And this is something we talk with a lot of leaders, something they want to understand, but it's not something they're intuitively equipped with because it's not their training. Um, you're looking here at a cross section of the human brain. That's what these different little black dots are, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The first thing I want everybody to do, I can't see you, so I'm just going to trust that you're doing this. Cross your arms however you want. Just take a moment, cross your arms, get in that stance. Cross your arms the other way. Just see how that feels. And if I could bring you off mute, I'd ask people to call out, hey, how does that feel? And having done this dozens and dozens of times, when people cross their arms the other way, they say awkward, weird, uncomfortable, meh, why? And all of those are in micro, really getting to what's happening on a neurological level when people are asked to do something new. If you look at this little framework of neurons going from left to right, on the left, what you're looking at is trace neurons. It is people just learning how to do a skill. It's my first time playing the piano. When you see all the way over to the right, when through deliberate practice, constant repetition, yeah, Tammany, absolutely. Yeah, right. This is what we're talking about. Is through constant repetition, we get to this level, we have super dense neural networks, and we don't even have to think about doing it. When we're asking people to change, what we're really asking people to do is go from something about the right hand side of things moving more to the left hand side of things. So, hey, you're going to have to lay down some new tracks here to be able to effectively exhibit this new behavior. And to some of the things that we're seeing in chat is that costs more cognitive energy. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about the cognitive cost a lot today. And crucially, when we make that change from thinking on this like neurologically, okay, this is what's happening in the brain, to thinking about that psychologically, like how does that show up in our psyche? That for many people, the most common response to change is a feeling of loss. It is a feeling of, ooh, I knew how to do something and now I don't know how to do something. And this is really, I think, important for managers and leaders to understand because when a change initiative is rolled out, there is often resistance. There is often people saying, this is why it's not going to work. This is how it'll never be able to get done. Really, man, you want to do this? And it's actually important to understand that that's normal, that that is a human response. And it's not the end of the story. It's one that should actually be acknowledged, understood, and moved through. And when we start to think about, okay, on a more nuanced level, what is happening for people? We see managers have the best managers have a more subtle understanding of the human experience, but that's not everybody has psychology degrees. Not everybody has been equipped with that language. And so we use a model called camps to help managers understand better, cool, this was what might be going on for people on my team. CAMPS is an acronym. It stands for certainty, autonomy, meaning, progress, and social inclusion. And these are 5 brain cravings. When we do our work on employee engagement, we often use the CAMPS model as a way to talk about, when you have employees that are really motivated, that are, taking the initiative, self-managing, what they have is 10 out of 10 full fuel tanks across these 5 dimensions. When change happens and people are experiencing negative emotions, it is often the case that we can locate those emotions in one of or multiples of these 5 brain cravings because that's the psychological root of where people are experiencing their resistance. I saw Cindy say in chat that unlearning is hard. This is exactly what I'm talking about here. Just to give you some examples, I think once you start to think about it, it makes sense, but just to put some examples in your brain, certainty, right? What now do I need to do? And uncertainty can feel like such a huge obstacle to change. I worked with a team yesterday that had just gone through a reorganization, and one of these managers was talking about, I don't know my new manager, the new director I'm reporting to. I don't know how they work. I don't know what their expectations are. And that just, it fills me with anxiety. That is just what it is. Connected to that is autonomy, a feeling of control over the situation. And we see so much of this conversation about autonomy happening in the return to work, the hybrid work, the distributed work of who's in control here. But even just on a more micro level, talking with this manager yesterday, their previous managerial relationship, they had a lot of say, a lot of executive decision making. Will they get that with their new manager? Just those questions come in. Meaning, as I think, such a powerful one that can be overlooked when we're in the day to day of execute, execute, execute. But why does this matter? Um, why do I matter inside of this? How is my work connecting to the bigger constellation of what my team or the company is doing? This can get lost when we reshuffle things, and people want to know how they are a part of something that's bigger, something that matters. Progress. Humans have such a desire to keep moving forward. That's why we're constantly talking about continuous improvement, always be learning, why feedback is so powerful. Worked with yesterday in the conversation, there was a team that had to pause promotions. They were about to hire a bunch of new people and then promote new people into the managerial position so people could start a leadership journey to manage that headcount. But due to some economic uncertainty, they actually said, sorry, the hiring plan for Q4 is no longer what it was. You're no longer going to be promoted to manager. And that creates a lot of anxiety for people because it's a career progress issue. Like they don't feel like they're moving forward. And then lastly, social inclusion, which is both about connectedness, which is really important in this hybrid workplace, but is also about fairness. Often this is an overlooked thing in distributed teams of how even just when you choose to put the meeting and which time zone that's falling in, or how in-office employees are impacted by something versus how people who are working from home are impacted by something. And if that's not considered, that can create real disparities and create factionalization, and people are starting to resent those people over there, even though they're all on the same team, but there are these barriers or these divisions that we didn't think of. And so this is something that, as a psychology nerd, I love thinking about this like really in depth. But I'd actually be curious to hear from a few people. And again, chat is a really great tool here. And Ben, thank you for continuing to pull through the examples. Encourage people to think about a time that you went through a change. Maybe it wasn't your choice. What was activated for you? Where would you put your resistance or the anxiety or maybe the excitement? Like, that's also another part of this is, this is going to reduce my progress, but honestly it's going to impact my sense of meaning, so the trade-off is worth it. But share in chat examples of changes you were put through, and even in this moment reflecting on your own emotional experience, your own psychological experience. How might you describe where that resistance came from via the camps model? Adriana, thank you for sharing social inclusion. Ali, a move to a new state, social inclusion, really powerful. Lori, not given a voice, absolutely. Victor, thank you for sharing feelings of meaning and progress. Deborah, absolutely, right? We saw 2020, 2021, all of this feelings of uncertainty and anxiety around that. And uh, yeah, Colleen, probably a good point. Pandemic impacted all of these buckets. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't choose this. What I think is really important. Oh, Gerald, not enough notice. Absolutely. There is so much to think about in terms of how our changes are going to impact other people. And if we just look at a change at the execution level, Julia, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that around layoffs and the amount of uncertainty and social inclusion and feelings of meaning in the work. Like, what are we doing here when those big things happen? Um, it is crucial for managers to be equipped with the forethought, the emotional intelligence to be able to think, I'm going to make this change. How are people going to feel? Where can I start to think about the resistance that's going to happen? Because what happens when managers think about this is it leads to all sorts of beautiful downstream things. You see more listening tours to ask the question of like, hey, how does that feel for you? You see more skillful messaging around it. So like, I understand that you might be feeling this and this team might be feeling this, but ultimately I think we're going to be able to get to this goal together. But that only comes from thinking about other people's emotional experiences. So that is a space that I love to spend time, but I want to make sure that we get to some other tools to add to the tool belt. And so we're going to talk now about what are some of the simple habits that we see really great change leaders, change managers use consistently. And I think it's helpful to think about the process of change. I'm going to present it as a linear model, but I think we all know in this day and age, really nothing feels all that linear. We can be in multiple stages with different people at different times, but a straight line is an easy way to talk about things. This is coming from psychologist Kurt Lewin, who talked about, behavior change is this process of letting go of whatever the past was, if there was even a sense of certainty there. But let's let go of the status quo. We can unfreeze. Let's recommit to the new thing. Okay, you're telling me I have to start putting my left arm on top instead of the right arm. All right, let me start to practice this. And then to all the points that were made about, it's not just about making the change, but it's keeping it consistent. It's thinking long term about how to make sure this doesn't fizzle out. This is the refreeze stage. And when we do this workshop for managers, we get a real opportunity to do workshop case studies with them, coaching them, thinking about, cool, where are you at stages with your change initiatives? What do you think are going to be the best tools for you? But for today, what I want to offer is like one high level tool for each one to just get your brain thinking about, how might I use this? Or how does this layer on top of things I'm already doing? And so the first tool when we think about unfreezing people, helping people let go is the vision statement. And, you know, there's recently in the like organizational psychology space been this debate around, well, is it a vision statement or is it a purpose statement? Anyone here who listens to Brene Brown's podcast, she just had on Linda Hill from the Harvard Business School talking about the difference between vision and purpose. All of those are really wonderful conversations. For the purpose of today, I'd say both of those are really hitting the same thing because it is about being able to communicate effectively the why behind the change and not just why you want to do it. People are really great about talking about themselves, but talking about the change through the lens of the collective, how that change is going to impact you, how that change is going to impact us, how's that going to help us get to our goals. And I know I said I was going to say one tool, but without doing listening tours, there's really no point in doing a vision statement. So I will just say this is the bonus tool. This is my reminder of something that I hope you have already heard before: the importance of doing listening tours for every change management process possible, going and talking to your stakeholders, having that conversation. I think there's a really powerful insight here for anyone who was around in the 80s and Dr. Dean Ornish's popularity. Uh, Dr. Dean Ornish was the first doctor to get an FDA approved intervention for heart disease that had nothing to do with medication. It was all lifestyle and behavior. And his key insight is, well, how do you generate a mass mobilization of behavior change for people to protect their own health? It's the ultimate like selfish act of change. You cannot tell people what to do. The moment you make it about compliance is the moment that you invite resistance. And so listening tours are about creating opportunities for people to share, ask questions, be telegraphed, hey, this change is coming. What's the feedback that you have for me? And I imagine that there are people who are on this call who have experience running listening tours. Please drop into chat your best practices, your pro tips, the things that you try to mentor the next generation about when they're in change management, because there's so much to think about here. It's, who are your stakeholders? Are you thinking inclusively about your stakeholders? Are you thinking about people who maybe don't usually have voice in the conversation, and can you actually boost their feelings of autonomy to bring them in? There is so much to think about in terms of effective listening tours. And people who are routinely in this habit of having two-way conversations, tell me what you think, like give me your insight, how is this going to make you feel? It sets people up to then deliver more compelling communication statements. And if you look at, great managers who are talking about, hey, we're migrating to a new email platform, or leaders who are talking about, hey, we're putting information here, or we're pivoting to putting information in this template. Or if you look at the macro level, you look at politicians that are trying to get elected, TED Talks that are delivering really inspiring messages, you see some very consistent patterns in how those communication messages are built. And so we work with managers and leaders who maybe don't have that same level of familiarity with rhetoric and communication style. What's the simplest possible recipe to build an effective communications plan to be able to talk about your change in a way that will open people up to it, lower defensiveness and resistance? Acknowledgement, head, heart, urgency. Acknowledgement is maybe the most important part. When we talk about listening tours, it is about then weaving in that data into the conversation. And so sometimes that's saying, hey, I talked to this team and they're anxious about this. I talked to this team and they're anxious about this. We definitely understand that there's going to be a risk with this choice, but we're going to do it anyway, or this is why we're going to do it. So it's acknowledging that. Or it can be, I know that there are people who don't agree with this. And I know there are people who think we should do this. And I know there are people who are concerned about a lack of autonomy. All of those are ways of effectively demonstrating we really did listen. We really do care. There's a researcher at UC Berkeley named Dacher Keltner, who is a psychologist who studies two really interesting things. He studies empathy and he studies power. And what he found is it is a a key pattern through most of organized human society is the people that we choose to lead us, the people that we say, like, yes, I will follow you, are the people who are best able to have empathy for our situation. And so when managers are able to really nail the acknowledgement phase of, I see where you're at, I understand what you're thinking, I, I had these conversations with you, it is a way of reinforcing social credibility and demonstrating they've done that thinking about empathy. But people also want to know where they're going and why. And so it's important to think about different animating, activating energies. And it's helpful to think here about both emotional resonance and logical resonance. And so when we talk about the heart, what we're really talking about is all of those ways in which stories, symbols, values really motivate folks to be able to say, we're making this choice because our core value as an organization is to put the client first, or one of our mission this year is to increase our reach to markets we've never visited before, because we know that those are people who need our services. Those are ways of talking, or simply imagine how good it will feel when you don't have to do all this extra work. That's talking about the heart. The head is talking about the logic side of things. It is thinking about, great, we know that if we make this choice, we're going to be able to save X% of time. Or we know that if we put these deadlines on it, we're going to reduce your bottleneck from incoming traffic from client requests. And I think one of the interesting things about the dance between head and heart is, different people are going to lean different ways. I am in psychology. Before I was in psychology and organizational development, I was actually in theater. So I love talking about symbols and stories. I am less good at the data driven side of things. So that's where I really, when I'm communicating a change, I have to put extra cognitive energy to make sure that I'm coming in with a compelling logical case. Other people who are grounded in STEM growing up, that might be the other way, is that they need to think more about, how do I animate emotions and talk about the emotional experience here. And then lastly, urgency. Why now? Why should I invest time and energy in doing this? Because otherwise, there's no reason to act. One of the best parts of doing this work with managers is getting to hear them work through their vision statements. And it is my dream that you all take this template and share it with managers, share it with your colleagues, and try out all sorts of different ways of communicating change initiatives, to see what resonates and how you can use those trusting relationships, all the information you've gotten from folks, to be able to message effectively. And again, I see there are things that are coming in chat from people about this kind of communications plan. If you have other pro tips for folks on the call, please drop your thoughts there. But this template, this recipe, it can be expanded, it can be contracted. You can use it for a keynote. You can use it for, hey, can we put our information into a new template? Both of those are going to work, just with different sizes and scopes. Cool. So that is talking about how we help people release from the status quo, build activation energy for the new change. When we talk about actually getting people to do the thing, the best thing we can think about is the cognitive cost. Again, I refer back to the point that was made earlier around, it is hard to unlearn things. So how simple can we make this new behavior? How can we reduce the amount of energy that is taken? And I think the most important thing to consider is, you know, death by initiative, project bloat. I think there were, like, a few years ago, Harvard Business Review published a big article around just too many projects, just people are doing too many projects. And it is so easy to be additive. I want to add this. I want to add this. I want to add this. But of course, if you've been on the receiving end of sort of that additive management, you know that everything crumbles under the weight of my brain is trying to think about too many things at a time. When we talk about change fatigue, in many ways, this is where brains are being overloaded by too many plates spinning. And so thinking really intentionally about, when I'm adding something new, where can I deprioritize? How can I help people say no to something in order to say yes to something else? Recently worked with a small growing organization that realized that the time had come. They needed to institute formal one-on-ones, that managers needed to be having weekly one-on-ones with everyone on their team. So that's a pretty big time commitment. The way that they made that change is said, okay, this weekly report that you need to submit, that's like a summary of your progress and hitting your KPIs and your OKRs. Yeah, you don't need to do that anymore. We're going to invest in a dashboard that allows us to see that data really easily so that you can free up time to be on what we think is the priority, which is relationships and conversations with the people that you're managing. So removing before we add. The second thing is thinking about how you can message change in a way that takes advantage of what James Clear, the writer of Atomic Habits, calls habit stacking. The idea that things are easier in our brain when they're connected to something that we already know. And so, every time I sit at my laptop, I take a drink of water. That's an easy way to help me like stay hydrated because I'm gonna sit at my laptop. Reminder, take a drink of water. Um, an organizational example, we worked with an organization where their engagement survey showed that people weren't getting enough feedback, just like really unsatisfied with the amount of feedback they were getting. And she said, okay, we don't need to add something new. We're going to take our weekly department stand-ups once a month. Those weekly department stand-ups are now retros. They're just feedback conversations at the team level where people can celebrate their success and can revisit and give feedback on process breakdowns. Really simple way. We're saying you don't have to add anything new, just change something you're doing here. Um, Another simple way of talking about that is, look, yeah, you're going to cross your arms, but your arms are still crossed. All that you're doing is changing which one is on top. It's reinforcing to people this is what's staying the same. These are the structures you already have inside your brain. Here's the tiny tweak that I want you to make. So it's recontextualizing the size and scope of that change. If you are following along, it might be worth thinking about how can you make your change 1 point lighter, the one that you wrote down at the beginning, or in chat, just sharing examples of recent change initiatives that you've run where you've had success in messaging it this way, either taking something away or connecting the change to something that's already happening inside your organization. I'll give people 30 seconds to think about this. What are examples or aspirations that you have around the way to really put this into practice? What does this look like inside your teams? And I want to then take us to second to last tool, which is really thinking about the fact that human beings, this number gets updated every year about how much information are we processing in a single day. And the last number I saw from 2020 was that we're processing 75 gigabytes of data every single day when you start to accumulate all the social media we look at, all of the emails, all of the Zoom calls we're on, looking out into the world. There's just so much raw information. It is no surprise that messages get lost in the shuffle. And so, what we see from really great change leaders is really intentionally building in effective frequency. Research into memory and psychology has shown that it takes 6 to 20 times for people to remember a message. I'm going to say that again. It takes 6 to 20 times for people to remember a message. We need to hear a message multiple times before it sinks in. It takes 6 to 20 times for a message to sink in. It takes 6 to 20 times for a message to sink in. Can people please put into chat how many times does it take for a message to sink in? But 6 to 20 times. That is just to say that leaders need to make multiple communication channels a part of the plan. I saw that really early in chat. Someone had shared, look, it's not just about the email update. It is also about using Slack. It's also about using our weekly meetings to talk about it there. It's company newsletters. I've even had people who have started using virtual backgrounds, like customized to remind people, like, hey, our retreat is on this day. You got to submit these action items before we show up to that retreat. And so there are all sorts of different ways to message that change, to set up reminders to keep that change going. And so, yeah, Nicole, takes more than that. Absolutely. That's why we say 6 to 20 times. There is interesting research on kids asking their parents to buy them something, that it's the seventh time is when parents finally say yes. So smart kids know to ask, can I have that toy? 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 It's that seventh time where we start to break down. As a new parent, that is something that I am deathly afraid of, is when my child figures that out. So that's talking here about how do we help people unfreeze? How do we simplify the plan for them? And then how do we make sure that we keep talking about it? Um, we work even with organizations that think about over communication through the lens of different kinds of reminders in the physical environment, in the digital environment. Oh, Lauren's talking about, can there be too many channels? Um, I appreciate the fear, the anxiety there around slamming people with like too much noise. I think there's probably worth having an internal conversation around communication discipline to say, like, hey, nobody wants a reply all snowball. We don't like that's an undisciplined communications plan. And so we've worked with organizations who are able to say, like, look, when you're rolling out a change, these are the 4 places that we know you can put it in that people are going to see. So we'll put an agenda on the meeting, put it in the update, drop it into Slack channel, and department level meetings as well. I'm sure there's such a thing as too much. I will say that we tend to see organizations erring on the other side of not thinking long term enough about that messaging. Danielle, does it matter who the messaging comes from? Yeah, I'd say it absolutely matters who the messaging comes from. There are different levels of organizational capital, social capital, the voice that can carry different weights. I will say, for managers who are working like at the team level, it is often trust with people, like the ability to do the listening tours to build those conversations. That's really where you're going to get the relational trust. But yeah, this is why senior leaders messaging things is so important. When we work with senior leaders or work with organizations, for example, on changing feedback culture, which really is like a long shift to get people to embrace a new way of thinking about giving feedback, we very intentionally train the managers, because they're really the drivers of the skill set. But then we train the senior leaders as well. Like, look, this is the language that your team is using. The best thing that you can do is publicly celebrate this and talk about this a lot, because you're going to be able to endorse it with your organizational capital. This is something that I see as really important. So absolutely. One last idea that I want to offer before we bring ourselves into our closing here, which is something that came up, Jay talked about in his intro, is really rarely do we find ourselves getting into this like refreeze for a long time, that any change that we hit is going to keep itself the same for 2 years. Instead, what we see the last 2.5 years have shown again and again is that every plan is a tentative plan. Every day we think we're returning to the office is subject to change. Every hiring plan is subject to change. And so there's actually a real skill, not only in being able to communicate a vision, not only be able to communicate, use listening tours, but also to keep people ready to change. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. We call it staying slushy, because when we think about this like frozen versus unfrozen, slush is that thing in that beautiful in between state. Like, yeah, there's something there, but also we can reform if needed. And so I'm actually curious to hear from folks in chat. What are some of the strategies that you've seen work on your teams to normalize, to prime people to stay changeable? so that they are able to quickly respond and navigate whatever is coming down the pike, the unforeseen, unknown unknowns. And as people are dropping ideas into chat, I also want to share two frameworks that we've seen work incredibly well to help people stay in this place of changeability. The first is talking about it all of the time. Um, we know that, oh, I love what I'm seeing in chat: curiosity mindset, constant learning, continuous skill development. These are all mindsets of we got to keep getting better. We got to keep getting ourselves ready. Danielle, I love that. Absolutely. Um, when we see in interviews people being asked the question, hey, behavioral interviewing, tell me about a time in which you were in an organization that was constantly evolving. How did you handle that? That normalizes it at onboarding to say, like, hey, thank you so much. The policy used to be this, the policy is this now. In one-on-ones, yeah, that change happened, we should expect that. I also love what I'm seeing in chat around praising flexibility, showing what roadmaps are, sharing iterations. Read, absolutely. Set the expectation to stay curious. Love that. Absolutely. And I think the last, oh, Alexandra, this is what the overall goal is, but the path on how we get there may change. Absolutely. The last thing I'd offer is to practice what psychologists call affect labeling, which is what psychologists have found is if we can name our feelings, they actually reduce in intensity, which is, of course, really important for those negative feelings that come up. I feel sad. I feel angry. Many of you probably know the design firm IDEO. We had the opportunity to work with them and talk with them about, like, well, what do you do for change management? That is often what you're doing is process management, but how do you do that internally? And they shared that they call the moment when everybody thinks that the project is a failure. About halfway through, everyone is like, I don't know what we're doing here. They call that the fog phase. And the reason that that matters is it normalizes and creates a little bit of a meta awareness to say, oh, this is the part where we all get confused and anxious. We're in the fog phase. I've heard other people call it the messy middle. Yeah, we're in the messy middle right now. This is just what is to be expected, is we should all be questioning ourselves. That's cool. I worked with an organization that called this the paperwork phase. That they were developing new products. There was all this exciting innovation in R&D, and then all the momentum would die. And people like, did we really do this right? That's just the paperwork phase. And I love all these things that are coming in chat around applying mistakes, continuous learning. How do we just keep getting better based on what we learn? I think this is all speaking to the mindset of staying slushy, staying in a place where it's easy to pivot. So, I have shared here, I think, a really nice representative sample of all sorts of different tools. And I just really appreciate everybody putting things in chat and sharing wisdom with each other, sharing experience with each other. Um, I'll just say that, Jay is about to come back onto the screen to share some closing thoughts with you and to share a feedback form. We so desperately want your feedback. It's how we understand, what was valuable here. When we run the next one, how can we make that better? I'd say the practice here is pretty simple. Stay slushy. Keep talking about this flexibility with the people on your team. Normalize it, celebrate it, promote it everywhere you go. And if there's any further conversation that you want to have around bringing in any kind of training for your teams, or you want to partner more with LifeLabs Learning, you can find us. You can email me, jack@lifelabslearning.com. You can search LifeLabs Learning, and I'm sure there'll be follow-up materials sent after the session. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time, your attention, your energy. Jay, I want to please give it to you for closing thoughts whenever you are ready to come back onto the stage.
Jack, thank you. Thank you for that session. And thank you to the participants. This is an experiment for us. This is a new series, as I said. It is one that, that we're just experimenting with. And the amount of interaction and activity, just the way you leaned into this session today was really, I think, exhilarating for us to see. And I hope instructive and exhilarating for you all as well. you got a taste there of what LifeLabs Learning does. And if you're like me, it's probably leaving you wanting more. So do reach out to Jack, and also be ready to participate in more of these programs later in the year, as I noted. I'll give you some dates there in a second. But if you will take a moment, there should be an alert, I think, at the top right of your screen that has a link to the feedback survey. Please do take time to fill that out. It'll really, as I say, help us shape these in the future to make sure that they're as effective and useful for you as they can be. I put in the chat a couple of ways to follow us on Charter, which will allow us to push to you more information on everything from subsequent sessions that we'll do to new programming like this that we are likely to launch. And also, some of you in the chat had mentioned that you'd love to get a recording of this. And we do intend to make that available. Again, you'll be alerted through social media posts. Feel free to reach out to me at the letter J at charterworks.com. Reach out to me directly, and I'm also ready to help steer you toward any resources, whether they are ours or LifeLabs or BrandLive's. And lastly, I just want to thank again BrandLive as well. This platform was really elegant. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and you should reach out to them as well if you can see a use case for you to deploy the BrandLive platform in your own company. So thank you again for carving out time today. We look forward to feedback. We look forward to further engaging with you down the road. The next session will be on September 7th, and we look forward to seeing you all there. So thank you for joining us.